Up, guys? A special Wednesday night, off night garden
Tuesday,
report.
John. Come on.
Oh, come on. Yeah, we play on Wednesday. Tuesday night garden report with a special guest. Obviously, we got Bobby Manning here alongside me as always, but Brian Barrett, host of the Off the Pike podcast at the Ringer Podcast Network. What's going on, man?
How you guys doing? Thanks for having me.
We're good.
Good
We're
to have
good.
you, Brian.
So we'll kick it up. There's a lot of stuff talking, and I'm sure, and I know I listened to some of your podcasts with Michael Pina as well about some of the Celtics issues. We've got Smart and closing lineups. You've got Grant Williams. You've got Rob Williams, and a host of other things to talk about. So we'll kind of kick it all out. I'll kind of start you with this question: Did you spend most of your day or most of the past few days, or let's just say most of today, talking people off a ledge or being talked off a ledge?
I would say being talked off a ledge.
Okay.
When I was doing my podcast today, I told Michael Pina, like, okay, man, I'm feeling a little bit better about this. But after last night's game, I don't know how you guys felt, but that was, to me, it's got to be the worst loss of the season, right? I mean, the Rockets are a team that's in the Wembanyama sweepstakes. Like, it wasn't great for them that they won that game last night.
And they almost called in the tank, too. You saw it last couple minutes.
But, I mean, I felt like once they cut it close at the end there, they were going to win. And then, like, this Smart thing to me is becoming a real problem. Late in these games, he's just made some atrocious decisions. I mean, I even go back to the game the other night where he's throwing the ball off the shot clock. He dropped a bounce pass from Jason Tatum against Cleveland.
Yeah.
And then last night we saw some similar mistakes. I mean, the charge was indefensible. He did make a nice play when he drew that foul, but, man, it's just like, I don't understand the rationale with not playing Derek White. That's what I'll say. I don't know why he's not in the court last night.
Yeah, Bobby, we've spent a ton of time about this on the Garden Report. Bobby, I want your take on this one too, because this is kind of this is the money right here. We've been talking about this all year, whether Joe Mazzulla would be able to make difficult decisions if the play on the court kind of necessitated that being the case. And I think we're there, and I think we've been there. First off, just want to let people know that the podcast is powered by our exclusive wagering partners at CLNS Media, FanDuel. If you want, and if you're into this sort of thing, as you know now, it's legal to bet in Massachusetts. So head over to fanduel.com/Boston. Take advantage of that deal. Bet 5, get 200 in bonus bets. I know Brian knows about this as well because you guys are well entrenched with FanDuel over at the Ringer as well. But Bobby, what's your kind of take on the Marcus stuff, man? Because again, we've been all over this all year long. And Brian, I'll tell you, early in the year, among the things we talked about was exactly that. Of the problems Joe Mazzulla may or may not face is he going to be able to make that type of decision, a difficult decision, where he looks at what's going on and say, I love you, buddy, but the other guys are playing better. And people at home are kind of all screaming the same tune, right? Like, how is White not in this game right now? Mazzulla himself has admitted that, like, I messed it up. I got to play this guy. And then you see them start
that Knicks game.
You see them start the fourth quarter with Brogdon and White, which means what? One of them is certainly coming off for Marcus Smart to come in and close the game. It's already been predetermined, regardless of whether or not that's the direction you should go based on how people are playing. So, Bobby, we're kind of back here with this. Like, at what point does it happen? Does it change? Will there ever be a change?
It should happen on the given night it needs to happen. And last night was certainly that night. There's been a handful of them recently. And like we talked about last night, Brian, they almost use foul trouble when Smart runs into it as a way to get more minutes for White and Brogdon, swinging in that other direction. So if they're going to, because normally if Brown or Tatum are in foul trouble, they'd probably push them a little further with that foul trouble to get more minutes from them and keep them in the game. When Smart's in foul trouble, it's like you're right out of there. And the evidence is pretty overwhelming at this point. White has had a sensational season. I was saying last night, you would hear Ime last year saying we don't lose much when White's on the court. He said that multiple times throughout the course of last year. I get why Joe defaults to Smart, and I think we all imagined it was going to happen this way this year at some point, that Smart would be that default option just because of his status on the team, probably some amount of his ego, and them wanting to still have him out there for those Smart type plays in the end. But right now you're getting so much more bad than good. Yeah. So you have to consider some sort of change there.
What's he waiting for, Brian, if you had to guess?
Or
is he never going to do it?
Looks at it.
Yeah.
I think eventually, like, he's going to be forced to do it, right? Like, whether it's a tight, that's my hope. I'm holding out hope that, hey, if it's a tight game in the playoffs, he will actually go to somebody else and not go to Marcus Smart. My thing is now what I think he's trying to do is he's trying to get Smart to get back on track, right? Because now this is 11 games back from the injury, and he hasn't looked like the guy pre-injury. Now, he had a really rough start to the season from a shooting perspective. He hasn't been the same defender, quite frankly, all season long. But from when he came from, a little bit into the season, he was having one of his best passing years, right? He's over 7 assists per game. But ever since he came back, like the assist to turnover ratio is putrid. It's 1.45, which for a point guard, that's not very good.
Yeah.
And I look at some of the stuff like the on-off numbers. I know it's not the end-all be-all, but the last 11 games, right, since he came back from the injury, I tweeted this out today. White on the floor, Celtics are plus 56, best on the team. Smart on the floor, minus 35, worst on the team. The off the court, minus 29 with White off, which is the best in the negative territory, and Smart plus 62. They've outscored teams by 62 points when Smart's off the court since he's come back. So the only rationale that I possibly can have with this is he's trying to let Smart play through things. But at some point, like, you have to look at it and say, hey, we're chasing down the Bucks. We're trying to get the number 1 seed. We know how important that is because of the fact that, hey, even if you think the Celtics, they're not going to lose to Philly because of the recent history, that's still going to be a physical series, a demanding series. And it's a series that I would, quite frankly, try to avoid. So if you are serious about the 1 seed, you got to play the better players. And right now, White is just playing better than Smart.
Yeah, I personally care less about the 1 seed than figuring out what your rotations are, who you're going to play, and
you're running out of time for
and
that.
Finding some sort of rhythm. Like the most vexing thing and the most concerning thing about the Houston loss to me, Brian, was not that like you had an off night. It's that you're doing it at this point in the season. Like you're running out of time. You can't have I guess we got to try harder sort of games. And you can't have ones where you just don't really have any sort of motivation or idea. The biggest problem to me is the identity. We've got this push and pull situation going right now about who they want to be, who they want to play. You're pulling guys out of the rotation. You're playing guys you shouldn't necessarily play. You've got Joe saying we got to shoot a ton of threes all the time, and the players kind of joking off to the side. You have Jalen making a comment a couple of weeks ago, and Jason Tatum offhanded as well, like, we're shooting a lot of threes, huh? So, like, I don't know that the players are down. I don't know that they're fully bought in.
It's Jalen especially to me.
At this point right now, where it's kind of like, I could shoot this 3, and Joe wants me to shoot this 3, but, like, I'm also really good at going to the basket, and I could get by this guy. What am I doing here? Am I doing what Joe wants and just jacking it, or should I do something else? And I think they're, like, they don't have a clue. Like, what's their identity right now? Like, what's the identity of this team? Last year, you had that super starting 5, and it looked like you had 6 guys on the floor playing defense at all times. Nobody could score on them. They were absolutely stomping people. What's this team's identity?
It's a good question. At this particular point in time, it doesn't feel like they really have one, right? We've talked about, look, the defense overall, the numbers are like, okay. Recently, since the All-Star break, the defense has been atrocious. And the biggest thing to me is the point of attack defense is just not nearly the same that it was a season ago, right? And now maybe part of that is not having Rob, right? Because Rob's only played in 28 games. So you can take more chances when you have Robert Williams back there because you have the roamer that's going to clean everything up. But right now, how many guys since the All-Star break, how many times have we seen a guy just get an easy lane to the basket? Or the other thing that's been problematic recently is the second chance points. How many extra opportunities are they giving up? I just feel like on the defensive end of the floor, since they came back from the break especially, they have not been dialed in whatsoever. Like last night, there's no denying it. They did not give the necessary effort against Houston.
Yeah, and that isolation defense is what confuses me the most. Now, I know you're mixing in some guys like Hauser, like Brogdon. Second unit probably has something to do with that. But they went from number 1 last year by miles in that category, blowing teams up by those individual matchups and switching everything, to just losing those battles consistently. And you have some atrocious numbers individually when you look at some of the guys like Brogdon. You have some better numbers between the Williams and the Horfords, and even Hauser hasn't done a terrible job in isolation this year. But across the board, you just haven't gotten those individual efforts defensively that you did last year. And I can't go back to anything other than the emphasis. When Joe came into training camp, it was offense, offense, offense. And I think that's continued to be his emphasis throughout the year. There's maybe been periods where they've tuned and made some adjustments on the defensive end, but overall, I haven't felt the force and the intensity and really even the scheming that we saw last year. Remember Rob playing off the ball and guarding wings, and he'd fly in and help on the weak side last year. Like, you just don't see a lot of that this year. In fact, I think they're just kind of dropping back to center a lot of the time and not switching as much and just playing a more passive style on that end.
Yeah, and well, that brings me to an interesting point. Like, so in the game last night, they bring in Cornette to try to get some level of boost, right? And he did. Admittedly, he gave them some energy. Like, he got an offensive rebound and he mucked some stuff up defensively. But then eventually what happened is the Rockets, even the Rockets who are not good, realize he's just dropping on every possession.
They hit
and they're
three
walking
threes
into
over
open
the
jump shots.
the Cornet contest.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's embarrassing to me. And that's why you reference the Williamses. Why isn't Grant playing? Like, in that particular situation in the third, why is Blake the first guy off the bench last night as a big? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Grant Williams, remember we were talking about this guy getting a $20 million contract because A, he was an elite versatile defender, and B, we know about the ability to shoot threes. Why isn't he playing more? Like, this one to me is one of the most confusing things in recent history of the Celtics, right? Because if you had told me
it came out of nowhere.
If you told me 2 months ago, hey, Grant Williams, you know what? He's going to get some DNPs. I would have told you, what are you talking about? Grant Williams? He may be one of their, like, he may be their best bench player. Like, you could have that argument early in the season with Brogdon. So if you do want to improve your defense, I would advocate playing Grant Williams more and not Blake Griffin, as great as he's been in terms of like a limited role. And Luke Cornette, I would play more Grant Williams. Call me crazy.
Well, I mean, it's the most perplexing thing, and we keep having the same conversation night in, night out after the games. It's become a full-on Malcolm Butler situation. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, and we're gonna wonder, like, what happened? Like, there's no way you can. Even if he's less effective, even if the stuff that he was doing well last year and at the beginning of this year, he's not doing it as well. Even if you also have the matter of this elbow, which. Amazing.
Elbow report,
He's appeared on the injury report a single time, okay? Once. The night after he misses the 2 free throws that cost him the game against New York.
Cleveland,
a mysterious report comes out about this elbow issue that's been bugging him the whole time. And he wasn't on the injury report that night, nor was he on the next night. I mean, this is just something you do. If a guy has a small ailment, you put him on there, call him probable. It is what it is. They won't even acknowledge this thing that somebody from Grant Williams' camp probably leaked out to get out there that, like, there's an injury going on there too. They won't play him at all. 2 DNP CDs. You can't possibly think that they think that Blake Griffin is the better option long-term into the playoffs. It's either a prolonged punishment or something's up that we just don't know. It makes no practical sense because it's not like the other alternatives are better.
They don't have alternatives right now. Blake had one game, and they were excited about it. Certainly, they were raving about him after it.
But then he needs like 8 nights off after one good game like that. Like, you can't count on that. You're going to put him in the playoffs and expect that to happen. It's asinine. And we've seen the Muscala. I don't think
that's barely played since he's arrived.
I don't think that's the answer either. So you have to find a way to make Grant work. Like, isn't it at the point, Brian, that it's their responsibility to figure out a way to utilize Grant to the best of his abilities, even if he's not at 100%? In whatever capacity, mentally, physically, whatever it is?
Yeah, well, that's where I land on it is like, and I know the shooting numbers have been down since apparently the injury was sustained on the 12th of February. He's like 34% from 3-point territory since that point in time. But to your point about Blake Griffin, I think it's a good one because of the fact that, all right, when you get into the playoffs, like, is it more important that Grant Williams was playing well down the stretch or that Blake Griffin was playing well down the stretch? We witnessed Blake Griffin in the postseason last year against the Celtics. He was spinning around like a top trying to cover high pick and rolls, right? Like, we know that Blake Griffin cannot play in the postseason. This has been established. At this particular point in his career, he can't do it. I would not want Luke Cornette playing in the postseason either. Now, you could convince me if you're dealing with some injuries, whatnot, maybe you tried out Muscala for like a stint to try to get some shooting going, something along those lines. But I do know that Grant Williams, and I know he struggled in the Warriors series, but a lot of guys are going to struggle against that type of offense. I do know that Grant Williams is important against the Heat. I do know that Grant Williams is important, especially against the Bucks, because, hey, guess what? You have 2 guys on your team that can legitimately match up with Giannis. You have Al Horford and you have Blake Griffin. Al is what, 36 years old? So if you're not willing to play Grant, that means what are you going to have? Al Horford on the court for 42 minutes? Because Jaylen Brown has shown an ability to be a good on-ball defender, as has Jason Tatum is a really good on-ball defender, really good off-ball defender, all that different type of stuff. Neither one of those guys are big enough in terms of their overall strength to cover Giannis. We saw it like in the series last year. They were seeking out Jaylen. And this isn't an indictment on Jaylen. It's just Giannis is so much bigger. So
even Rob struggled in that series.
Yeah. So why wouldn't you? A great point. Rob can't cover him either. So why wouldn't you want to get Grant in rhythm? I don't get it. Is it a punishment? I don't know. Like, did he do something that we don't know about?
That's what I think. It's like
because he won't answer the question, John, whenever it comes up.
No, and it's been asked, and we wonder if it's a confluence of things, Brian, in terms of like, okay, there's a little bit of the whining to the officials. There's a little bit of this, there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of you not doing what
you know what I go back to, John?
It's hard to say, but yeah, Bobby, I don't know. Go ahead.
That game before the All-Star break, they're in Milwaukee. They're shorthanded. They go down that final play in overtime. And I think White threw him the ball, and he's dribbling against Giannis, and he loses the ball, and that was the game there, down 3.
Yeah.
Stuff like that we saw all the first half of the season, and he comes into the year talking about the layers that he added to his game. You have the ejection against Chicago, all the complaining we talk about.
For hitting a woman?
Yeah, so this
whatever he did, was he barking at the refs there? Yeah,
he collided with the ref.
Put his hands on the ref. Yeah,
there were a lot of things early on, and then beyond the elbow report, wasn't there a report about he's looking for $20 million? He's going to get that out in the market, stuff like that.
Looking for 18 to 20, turn down whatever. You're wondering again how much of that the contract's gotten in his own head and it's affecting his play, and they know it. But Brian, I think it has to be some form of a timeout at this point because no other option is sustainable. Yeah, but when Rob went out, Grant had to play more. Him not playing more is just unfathomable. It's almost, I don't know if we're going to get an answer, but you have to expect at some point in the last dozen games or so, they're going to start to work him in again, right?
Yeah, I have to imagine. And I actually gave him credit at the beginning of the season because of the fact that he did come into camp in better shape. And then secondarily, the other thing I'd acknowledge is he's the guy that like really had his role flipped maybe more than anybody at the beginning of the season. Remember, it's like, okay, sometimes he's in the starting lineup, sometimes he's not in the starting lineup. And they were always like tinkering with him in terms of the lineup combinations. He was always playing with new guys. And I just look at the fact that if you look at the stretch here where this road trip is not very difficult for the Celtics, and then you have that huge game coming up against the Bucks. I believe that's the 30th at the end of the month. Is that the game against the Bucks where the final game against Milwaukee? Like, my goal would be to have Grant ready for that game because that could be now, depending on what the Celtics do during this stretch, that could be a game that goes a long way in terms of determining your seeding because right now it's 1-1. And I know that you're going to need Grant for that game. Like he's going to play in that game. So you might as well start doing it now because I just like my whole thing is this. What's the upside of Blake and Cornette getting these minutes? What's the upside? Okay, you get a good game from them.
Hauser, they don't have another bona fide option.
Well, Hauser makes sense because, again, I think Hauser is that guy where I understand why he's playing. You just want to make it perfectly clear, particularly if you have Joe in the style of offense he wants to play. I'm going to put Hauser out here. I'm going to put Brogdon out here in the second unit. I'm going to make it super easy. We're going to move the ball around. If either of those guys get it, boom, you just jack it, and that's what I want. That's what I want to see, especially if you have those kind of second units with Jaylen running in there, working with that group. It makes it, the whole thing, it makes sense why he's doing that. It makes sense why Hauser's playing. It doesn't make sense why Cornette or Muscala or Blake play. Those do not seem like viable options. So it's a mystery we have to get to the bottom of, but I don't know that we necessarily will. We're going to talk about a few more things here, but I do want to quickly take a pause, tell you once again about FanDuel here. As you know, wait is over. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, live in Massachusetts. New customers in Mass get in on the action. There's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Sign up at fanduel.com/Boston. That's our little special URL that lets them know we sent you, fanduel.com/Boston. Bet on all your favorite sports. Download the app. Super easy to use. Trust me, the interface is really, really easy compared to some of the others out there. So go check it out. Don't miss your chance. $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. fanduel.com/Boston. Make every moment more on America's #1 sportsbook. Again, have to remind everyone at home, you need to be 21 plus, present in Massachusetts. $10 first deposit is required. The bonus is issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at www.fanduel.com. Gambling problem, hope is here. Gambling helpline ma.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support. Brian, just kind of back to the overall, panicky sort of nature of the way people are viewing it now. If you look at all the issues right now, which one do you think is the thing that most concerns you?
Well, I would say the smart thing is concerning because he doesn't look like a guy right now that can close games. So I would put that number one. I would put the Grant situation number two, just because I don't know what's going on with that. Like, we don't have answers, but I still have faith that Grant Williams can get back to the player that he was for the majority of the season, where I thought he was having a really good year. And then I would put third on the list is Rob, right? Because when I look at Rob, it's 28 games he's played this year after missing a bunch of time last year. And really, I would argue he wasn't the same player until really the end of the Warriors series, when he was like the most impactful Celtic. But they brought him back for the Nets series. He didn't really do much. In the Milwaukee series, he had to take time off during that series as well. So we didn't get the real Rob until really the NBA Finals. And my whole thing with Rob is I've always compared him to like Gronk with the Patriots, right? Where I felt last year, if they had Rob, they were winning the NBA Finals. I thought they had a chance to win the championship without a healthy Rob. But if they had Rob, they were basically unbeatable, like the Patriots were essentially with Gronk. Like, yeah, they won a Super Bowl without Gronk, but look at Brady's numbers. Like, his passing rating goes to an astronomical level when he actually has Gronk on the field. And I would say that's kind of how that's how I feel about Rob. And it's not just the defense, right? Like, the rebounding is going to be much better with Rob. We know all that. But the other thing is, it just gives you an option that you don't have right now. Like, this team, their offensive rating would be the best in the league when Rob's on the court. They play like a top 4 defense. And this isn't like something that's just, it's a small sample size. We've now seen this for 2 years because they don't have a lob element. They don't have a guy that gets offensive rebounds. It's just something where right now you can see that Rob Williams is sorely missed. And I just wonder, is he going to be healthy for the postseason? Nobody can answer that, but it's every year, unfortunately, for him that he's dealing with some type of injury. And it's just when he starts to get going, it's like, all of a sudden he's got another injury. And he's working back in, but what's going to happen when he comes back 2 weeks after that? That would be, to me, like, this is the piece that sort of gives them a dynamic that not a lot of other teams in the league have.
Yeah, but the $46 million question is the version of Rob in our minds who we know he can be from a year ago, from wherever, pre-injury. Is that guy exist currently, whether he ever will again, to be determined. But this year, slow out of the gate, came back. I think it was pretty clear, and you could tell the tone of some of the things that were said about him. Like, what's holding things up right now? Yeah, he's fine. He's just got to get in shape. So it took him a really long time to ramp up and get his conditioning right. You saw him in the beginning when he was playing. He couldn't really last more than 2 or 3 minutes before he'd really, really get winded. So it took a long time to get into condition. But the verticality isn't there in the same way that it was. He's not flying around in the same way that he was when he was playing that kind of free safety roamer spot on defense last year. Like, even though he's incredibly impactful, he's not the same Rob. Now you've got another injury and another setback and even more time on the shelf, and him coming back late in the year. Like, it's not coming off of knee surgery like it was last year. But do you expect anything close to top Rob when he does come back?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question to answer, right? Because we have to see, like, I don't know. I hope that we can get close back to that. And I have to imagine that this one, at least it's not the knee problem, which we've seen that has been a recurring issue. I thought before he suffered this most recent injury, like, I thought he was close. Now, I'm not saying that he was peak Rob from last year, but I thought he was getting pretty close, and he was having the impact. And now I know his blocks are down from where they were a year ago, but I thought he was pretty damn close to the guy we saw last year.
Yeah, and you're seeing, I guess, yeah, you're in a similar category with the on-off stuff with him too, especially with the rebounds. Like, the offensive rebounding, defensive rebounding swing is huge when he's out there. The efficiency certainly was there as well, but I think the two biggest areas I looked at were that finishing around the rim. Not quite as high up there. You'd have some layups.
He's not getting off the ground as quickly as he used to.
Yeah, across the rim. And then defensively, I remember a game just before he went out. I forget exactly which one it was, but offensive players were getting shots up over him on the perimeter. He was really struggling to get out there and contest those. Now, you'll still take them. You'll take any version of them. Back to your Warriors point, Brian, he was a shell of himself in that series, and they were still like plus 35 or whatever it was when he played. So just having him out there with the length, with the defensive posture and the rebound he brings is going to be a positive for them, even if it's going to come off the bench. And when we're talking about these lineup discussions right now, it might almost make sense to send him to the bench.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're sending Marcus to the bench, but certainly I would look at sending Rob to the bench at this point for 5-minute bursts or whatever he was doing in January when he was at his most successful this year.
I think hockey shifts is the way to go with Rob. I think that's what you actually kind of need to do with him is keep it in short spurts. But again, do you go back, Brian, what Bobby's saying here? Do you go back to double big, which was
single big?
Huh?
Double big or single big?
No, I'm asking Brian, would you go back to double big if Rob comes back and put him back into that starting lineup and roll with it because it was so good last year and we've seen it good in spurts?
I think it would depend on like the matchup that you get in the postseason, but for the regular season, I'm with Bobby. I would bring him off the bench just because of the fact that you were mentioning the hockey shifts, right? Like, first of all, he's going to have to work back into shape again. And I do feel like these short spurts when he played, like when he first came back and he's playing in those short spurts, I feel like that may be the best for him. The only thing that I question is how many minutes are you going to get from him before you get into the postseason, right? Because if you look at it, like, I don't know if he can handle close to 30 minutes per game. Like, he may have to be closer to that 25 range, which would make me think that, okay, if he comes off the bench, that makes more sense. And I do think that if that is the case, if Rob's back, then you have to see Joe being more pliable down the stretch of these games in terms of what the closing lineup is. Like, as great as Al has been this season, and he's been great spacing the floor, there may be a game where, hey, you need Rob out there, right? Because he's playing so well from a defensive perspective. So that to me is the biggest question down the stretch, is how Joe sort of handles these closing minutes and if he's going to be more versatile rather. But I would bring him off the bench. I agree. I would bring Rob off the bench. I would try to, because this group has not been great lately, but from an offense perspective, it has been for the majority of the season.
Well, yeah, but looking at it now, you're right. Your hand might be forced with Rob because you might not have enough time to be able to ramp him up to the point where he can start and play 30 minutes. But it seemed to me to make perfect sense. You have a guy in Al Horford who's your only other viable big, really. And of course, you've got other guys you could bring in there. But with Grant not playing right now, you're extremely thin at that position. But all year long, I mean, you haven't had Horford on the second night of back-to-backs all year because you're trying to, be worried about his minutes. You've seen him go stretches where he's playing too many 36s, 35s in a row, and he starts to kind of power down a little bit, and that's not really ideal for him. And then you have Rob Williams, whose minutes you also have to manage. It kind of made perfect practical sense to have split them up from the beginning, even when Rob came back, and leave it that way instead of trying to get that magic back from last year. So I'm actually surprised they didn't do that. I wonder if some of the rotation issues would have been figured out a little bit more. I wonder if Rob would have been able to excel or to be a little bit better playing with that second unit. But now I think at this point, it's something you probably have to do and kind of stick with it. Because I don't think you can take, at this point, you're talking about closing games with Derek White. You can't take Derek White out of the starting lineup at this point. I don't think so.
I'll miss double big, John.
Oh, Joe will. Believe me, Joe will.
Yeah.
I know, Bobby, you'll miss it. I'll never miss it. I never liked it in the first place.
It was so good. I mean, what was it last year, Brian?
We had
plus
24 Magic, yeah.
It was like plus 24, something ridiculous per 100 last year, and you're waiting for that magic to come back. And whether it was Smart, who I really think has been banged up all year, he came into the year talking about the ankle injury from the East Finals. I think Joe said at one point that he's re-injured it 3 times or something like that. In this latest, I think he actually tweaked it again the other night. So he's not at his 100%. He
tweaked it like twice the other night.
Yeah, and then Rob certainly is going through a lot right now, whether it's a hamstring, whether it's a knee, whatever it is. And you're most fortunate Al's doing what he's doing right now, given the demand they've placed on him. And he's been that only reliable guy all year. It's amazing they are where they are with the center position, given that you knew Rob was going to get hurt at some point. You had reports that they're going to approach the deadline with Rob insurance in mind. And you go out and get Muscala, which I thought was a decent move for the price. We talked about on this show the limitations the Celtics had in terms of getting anything significant. You didn't have the Brogdon pick that you gave up to Indiana. You can't trade next year's with the Stepien. So, and you didn't have many second rounders, really, frankly, either. So I looked at Muscala and was like, all right, let's see what they do here. They think he can play the 4. They think he can fit into some of those double big combinations. He's not even playing backup big right now. And I guess he had an ankle thing going on too at one point, I heard. He had surgery a year ago on that. So I don't know how healthy he is. Maybe that comes into play here. But they don't really know how to use him right now either, it looks like. And how many times did we hear about Jakob Poeltl, who I thought would have been a really good option for them as Rob Insurance? Fit in the double big. Center for the future, maybe, if you want to re-sign him and let Grant go beyond Horford. And he goes to Toronto. He's been so good there for just a first. I think that's going to be one of the bigger second guesses this year if they don't win a championship, is not going out and getting more bona fide Rob Insurance.
Well, and especially too, if you don't see a lot of minutes from Muscala. Like, remember one of the first games he played here? He played like 40 something minutes. It was like the most minutes
Milwaukee
he's played
game,
in like 4 years or something. The game against Milwaukee, where he was just out there for an eternity, and then they had to give him a night off because he had to recover because he hadn't played that much in the Milwaukee game. So he had to like recover from that. But now it's a fair point on the Poeltl situation, especially considering how well he's played for Toronto. The one thing I will say, though, that I think would be interesting if you decide to bring Rob off the bench is they have actually found something. Like, how many times have we talked about the non-Tatum minutes over the past couple of years? I feel like they have found something when Jalen's out there with Brogdon and Sam Hauser.
Yeah.
Like, so the first time I really noticed it was in that Atlanta game. And I'm just like, at the end of the third quarter, this looks really good. Like, it looks like the reads are really easy for Jalen. And those numbers, by the way, 121.5 offensive rating, 109.1 defensive rating. So basically they're playing like the best offense in the NBA. They're shooting over 52% from the field with those 3 on the court without Tatum, and 41.8% from deep. Can you imagine if Rob gets back and if you're bringing him off the bench, if that sort of bench unit plus Jalen, and we'll figure out who the other guy is, includes Rob Williams, like a roller to the basket, like Rob setting a high screen for Jaylen Brown, who's either getting downhill, throwing a lob to Rob, or he's got the 2 shooters around him out there in Sam Hauser and Brogdon. Like, this to me would be a great lineup once Rob comes back to add to that group that's been really good.
The next lob Jalen throws to Rob will be the first. But in theory, I like that. I like that plan, you know. but yeah, no, I mean, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, and Jalen's playing great right now, which is like, as much as we're getting the panic meter on figuring where we all are, you have White rolling. Brogdon just has great game after great game right now. I mean, this trade has gone as well as anyone could have imagined. I don't know if he's going to win 6-man because it seems like Quickly's getting a lot of momentum right now in that department. But smash hit trade, probably one of maybe the best Brad's made so far. Best move, period, because I don't know where you'd be without Brogdon and the shot making he gives you night in, night out. He missed a couple games recently, and you really saw how much they miss him. They're going to have to find ways to maximize his minutes into the playoffs, too, as we talk about all these rotation things, because I think we've all looked at his role, the smaller bench role, and said, all right, great, you keep him healthy, you get a lot while he's out there in a short amount of time, and then you have him every night, which is pretty much what they've had this year. But now that the playoffs come along, I feel like you almost need him on the court as much as possible. So I'm looking at 3 guard lineups maybe to get all those guys out there for longer extended stretches. Because you can look at Brogdon as a wing almost, I feel like, and try to get him into that 30-minute range every night in the playoffs. And I almost feel like they're going to have to do that to be successful.
And that didn't make sense to me either. And I always wonder, and again, we saw last game, Brian, we talked about, like, they had the balance in the point guard minutes, but that's because there were some foul issues as well that necessitated people come out. But I think it was 28, 27, 29 between the 3 guys. But you had so many games this year where Malcolm Brogdon would come in, play terrific. And then you look at it, the minutes at the end, it'd be like Smart 37, Brogdon 21. And be like, how did that happen? Particularly considering those were stretches of time where Hauser wasn't playing. So he wasn't really coming in as that backup wing. So you would think you would have run a couple of smaller lineups, 3 guard lineups, 2 guards with Jalen in that second unit more and get more minutes for him. But it wasn't. It was kind of a rotation where there'd be odd men out. And a lot of times it was Brogdon. You'd look and it'd be like 20 minutes. How did that happen? He was great. You know, he's plus 14 with 16 points on 8 of, you know, I don't know how that happened. So I think Joe's been struggling to find the combo. I think almost from the beginning of the year, and I think still is a little bit now.
Yeah, and I think with Brogdon in particular, the interesting thing to me is about the 3 guard situation. That would allow him to guard up, right? Because I do think he does a good job in the post, and he does a good job with bigger players, right? Like we saw in that Lakers game, they put him on Anthony Davis, and they felt fine about it. Where Brogdon has trouble right now at this point in his career defensively is with quicker, smaller guards. Like he just doesn't have the ability like Derek White does to guard those type of players. So it would make sense to trot out some 3 guard lineups. The other component to Brogdon that obviously, I mean, he's turned out to be the best 3-point shooter in the league, which you thought his percentages would go up because if you go back to Milwaukee, like his catch and shoot numbers were great. It just in Indiana, he was overtaxed as the number 1 option. That's not the position that he should be playing in, right? He should be more of a second or a third option. But the thing to me that sticks out to him even more than the shooting, and I know, Bobby, you've referenced his finishing numbers have not been great, like actually been putrid in the restricted area. But he
It
does
makes no sense to me.
consistently drive the basketball, right? It's bizarre. Like and sometimes it just feels like I don't know. Like when you started like tweeting that out, I'm like, wait, is that it? What is going on? Because like he's so powerful. I don't understand why he can't fit. Maybe it's because he's not a great vertical athlete at this point in his career. But the one thing he does do is he constantly drives, right? He puts pressure on the defense. And it reminds me of like in the NFL when you have a running back and you're just pounding the football. It's like, okay, we don't want to tackle that guy anymore. And we've seen with Brogdon, you'll see defenders that are just like, all right, I'm not challenging this guy because he's going right through them. So I do think he brings that different element where last year they didn't have a lot of guys outside of Tatum and Jalen that would drive the basketball. And Brogdon certainly brought that. I mean, I'm amazed at how strong that guy is.
Brian, your boss, I think, and Bill Simmons is getting a little concerned about the coach. And I haven't wanted to go here all year. Because I think, again, 2 years ago, it's all fire Brad. Last year, I think everybody forgets Ime was on the hot seat early. People couldn't stand Ime and some of the stuff he did early on. And now everybody's missing Ime during this rough stretch. I feel like Joe's done a solid job. And I get a lot of the things he's going for. I mean, the threes worry me too. If I was going to stack it up like John just asked you to, I'd throw the 3-pointers in there. And what's concerning me, because I don't know if this team has the personnel to shoot the amount that they do, or at least the ability to hit as many threes as they need to rely on it, because they really have fallen below that league average mark more often than not since that hot start. I don't know. More and more you have to look at it. We're talking about all these rotation things. We're talking about Grant. We're talking about their 3-point reliance, the defense not being as forceful or attentive or schemed right as last year. I hate to go to it, but the more and more things start to slip here in the second half, he is a coach without a ton of experience. He is a guy none of us really knew much about coming into this year, and he really endeared himself to a 21-5 start. But is this stretch, I think it's 26-17 now since then, more indicative of what he is as a coach than the 21-5 start?
I think it's certainly a fair question. And if you look at that 43-game sample size you're alluding to, basically the shot profile is exactly the same. But the problem is they're not hitting the threes the way they were at the beginning of the season. So they're now, according to Cleaning the Glass, they're 12th in half-court offense in the last 43. They were, of course, first in the first 26 games when they were on that pace to be the best offense of all time. And if you look at the free throw attempts, they're 29th right now in terms of the last 43. They were 25th before that. Restricted area, 23rd in attempts to 26th in attempts. So it's basically the same shot profile. The biggest thing is the 3-point percentage has gone from, to your point, 36.3% over the last 43 to it was 40% in the first 26 games of the season. So my whole thing is, okay, when you get into the postseason, are you just going to adjust on the fly to what you've been doing all season long? Because it's like they don't really have another way to play if their threes aren't going in consistently. Now, my hope is in the playoffs, what happens is, okay, teams are on to you. You don't get all the pretty stuff we've seen in the past. Your offense gets fucked up. And that's where Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum will just have to take over games. But my biggest thing is like the lack of an ability to get to the free throw line where you should be able to get easy points. That's the biggest one to me. It's just alarming. And maybe this is like to the point that you guys were making earlier about Jalen. It does feel like he's kind of pushing back against it. Like, wait, why are we taking all these threes? Like, because Jalen's one of the best pull-up 2-point shooters in the league. He's over 47% on mid-range twos. And it's like that part of their game has been completely abandoned.
Gone. And that's Jalen likes to take it to the cup, pull up for ridiculously difficult contested mid-range twos that for some reason he makes it just a unbelievably high clip. That's the thing we talk about that on the show the most is that like what are they? Who do they want to be when they grow up? Again, you're just simply running out of time. Joe wants these threes. He wants them to play this way. And that's it. That's who you are. You're going to get into the playoffs and it's just going to be shrug the shoulders. We didn't make enough shots. That can't be it.
He's been able to say that game in and game out so
and that's
far,
what he keeps saying. Well, we got good looks. They didn't fall. You see it after every game.
You get to the end of the year, though, and no one's going to accept that from him, and he'll have to have a better answer then at that point. And lately we've heard him. He got a little more critical last night. I think he's looking at some of the smaller things that they're not doing right now and starting to criticize them for that. You had Brown's mistake late in that overtime game, the take foul. Last night he's talking about free throws. So he's starting, I think, if you read between the lines, I think, start to go at guys in a discreet way, I think, at this point. So he's even fine-tuning his approach. We haven't talked about the timeouts in a while. I think he's starting to do those more often. So we're seeing him grow and evolve on the fly. And again, I get what he's going for. Like Brown and Tatum had ridiculous years at the rim with all the spacing. When they hit their mark from three, they never lose. I think they're like 17-1 over the last 18 when they shoot over the league average. So I get what he's going for across the line here, and they do have good shooting personnel, but it makes me nervous. Like they're just going to put up 53s in a game, and if they miss 16 in a row in the wrong spot like they did against Brooklyn there, you're just going to throw up your hands and say, we missed shots, because a lot of these teams that have shot threes at a high rate historically, Houston, Utah, teams like that, haven't gone very far. And I know every situation's different. They're probably as best suited personnel-wise, other than the Warriors, to do what they're doing. But it has not been very successful.
Yeah, and that's the thing
is
they're not all created equal. That's the kind of thing that we're stuck on. Like, and it's hard that's the hardest thing to look at when you look at the numbers, Brian. It's like, are they getting the same type of threes? Are they just not falling because it was just an anomaly? They should have never been that hot to begin with, and this is closer to who they actually are? Or are they just settling now because that's who they think they're supposed to be and not really working for the type of shots they were getting early in the year? It was beautiful basketball, watching them moving, cutting, moving without the basketball, how quickly it was getting to open shooters. And it looked like and again, I bought it. I drank the Kool-Aid, and that's hard.
They looked like the Warriors.
I don't do that often. And I drank gallons of Kool-Aid at the beginning of the year. Like, forget defense. I love this team. Be this all the time. This is great. You'll figure out defense when you need it, when you get to games that actually matter.
They had Tatum in MVP contention category, and he's miles from that now. It's crazy.
Has their approach changed to how they're going about getting these shots?
Yeah, I think it has a little bit. The one thing I'll say about Tatum is, like, from March through the end of last season, like, his pull-up threes were outstanding. He was over 43%. But what we've seen this season is legitimately, and this is not meant to be an indictment on Tatum. Like, I love Tatum. He is legitimately the worst pull-up volume jump shooter in the league. A guy that's shooting him at a high volume.
It makes no sense.
It's like 30% in a effective field goal of like 40. It's really, really bad.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, like, all right, I've noticed with Tatum, when he gets a big on him, he's really good at the sidestep pull-up three. Like, when he gets a big on him, that's a really good shot. Sometimes he will settle when it's a smaller defender, and that's where I'm like, you can just get to the basket, because he's so much more athletic than these bigs. He creates so much space. That's a good pull-up three from my perspective. But the one when he settles for it against smaller defenders, I don't like that. But this is something that's been going on all season long with Tatum. So we'll see if he can get hot like he did last year. But to your point about, like, the quality of the threes, like, you can look like the open shots and all that. Like, I get all the data on that. But the one thing I will say is, and maybe this goes back to the rotation because these guys are playing so well together, but do you remember early on in the season how often we would see, like, clips coming out from the Celtics offense where the ball is just flying around? Like, it's a drive, it's a kick to the corner, it's a kick to the wing, it's back to the top of the key, and it's a wide open three. Like, when's the last time we saw that type of ball movement from the Celtics? Like, I can't remember, like, a stretch where I've seen it. Like, that was, like, beautiful basketball they were playing at the beginning of the year. So to your original question about the quality of the shot, even if you can look at the data and say, hey, the shots are still open, it's definitely not the same quality of open shot that they were getting early in the season where everybody was in rhythm, right? I just feel like they're out of sync right now. And I do come back to maybe play the guys who were playing for the majority of the beginning of the year.
Yeah, and also doesn't it neutralize, like, what is Jason Tatum to you at this point? Is he just a guy who you want to stand back there at the 3-point line and just jack it every time it touches his hands and he has a little bit of daylight? You're taking the basketball out of these guys. Like, let them play ball the
They
way
didn't look like a basketball team last night. That's what I
no,
really noticed.
at
Yeah,
all.
Jalen did.
Yeah,
Jalen took a different approach and had an outstanding game. Everybody else is just trying to get that shot off, and it looks sloppy. I even go back to Horford at the end of that Knicks game, that attempt. He just wasn't in the right position, right rhythm on that shot, even though it was a wide open shot for the win there.
yeah.
Something's off right now. I almost look at those little things too that he says are starting to slip. Is that a product of missed shots? Because we look at guys, and I think players admit this sometimes, that when shots aren't falling, maybe you're not getting in the right stance defensively. Maybe you're not as attentive on the boards. You're frustrated with your 1-for-9 shooting start if you're Tatum, and it might take you out of the game and all those little areas where we've seen him dominate. Because I don't feel like he's been the same defender as he was early this year. I don't think he's had a great rebounding year. You'll give him that. But he just hasn't been that all-around dominant player that we saw early this year. And I know he's got the wrist thing going on, and I'm sure different ailments that have hurt him as well. But I don't know. Something's just off here. It really is. And I tweeted out in the second quarter last night, you saw that the energy, that the flow wasn't there, and it just persisted until that final 5-minute stretch where they try to rally back into it. It's almost shades of 2021-22, Brian. It's not that bad, but you see elements of that where they're slipping with big leads in the fourth quarter, or they're giving up big runs at the end of quarters, and just playing these like 3-4 minute stretches where they just get completely dominated.
To that point, and Brian, I want your thoughts here, but I did want to bring this up because this always irks me when we see it, and we've talked about basically everybody on the show except for Jason Tatum, and everybody's entitled to bad games, everybody's entitled to bad shooting nights, and that's going to happen from time to time. But some of the things that Tatum suffered from recently, and certainly last night, isn't that. It's, I just didn't play hard tonight. I wasn't into it tonight. It's a weird thing to hear from your best player, like, ever. And you hear it a lot. You hear Jalen sometimes kind of, we didn't. But like, if you're playing 43 minutes and you're saying we didn't do this, you really mean they didn't do this. And so, the post-game commentary last night, again, was a little bit alarming. This was what Tatum said about kind of, taking a little bit of responsibility for what happened. Because again, we can look at shot profile, we can look at a lot of different things, Joe's rotations, injuries, and going on, but I think that lets them off the hook a little bit. Something like this to me is inexcusable.
I mean, you guys watched it. It wasn't great. We picked it up kind of too late. And, I take the blame for that. I, didn't necessarily start the best. And, I feel like that kind of spread throughout the team. And so, I have to be better starting the game, just from an energy level, being active out there. Because towards the end of the game, when we were trying to come back and, damn near trying to be perfect and, a couple turnovers or, they were hitting shots, they were already in a rhythm. That starts from the beginning. So I got to be better, and, we got to be better to start.
What are you doing at the start of the game if not being ready to play the start of the game?
It's a fair question. And I would say this about Tatum too. Like, it's actually amazing to look at his splits this season. Like, if you look at his first half splits, he's in the low 40s in field goal percentage. He's about 30% from 3-point territory. You go to the second half. Now, these numbers before last night's game, they were in the second half, he's almost at 49% from the field, and he's shooting north of 40% from 3-point territory. So it's amazing to think about that the guy turns into almost a 50-40-90 guy in the second half, when in the first half, he's inefficient from a shooting
slow.
standpoint. And that's the thing. I don't get it. So the one thing, and this kind of goes back to the offense in general too, and some of the issues with the 3-point shooting, I wish they would go to some of these pet plays more often when they're in a funk, right? Like, we see it after timeouts once in a while, but get Tatum the ball at the nail. When Tatum has the ball at the nail, he's basically, you cannot defend the guy. And like, it's okay, like during the game, not just like in the fourth quarter, to say, okay, let's go to the Marcus Smart, Jason Tatum pick and roll where Tatum gets the smaller defender on him, or let's go to that play with Derek White. How often did we see that? And I get it. They were picking on Trae Young at the end of the Atlanta game. Back-to-back possessions, it's Tatum and Derek White. The first one, Tatum's the ball handler. The second one, he's running up the court and he tells Derek White, like he points to him as if like, I'm going to set you a screen. Both those plays they score on. So I think sometimes the answer to this question about the 3-point shooting, if you're not hitting these shots consistently, I think one of the things that Missoula could do to help these guys out is say, hey, let's go to Tatum at the nail. Hey, let's go to Marcus Smart. You set the screen for Tatum. Or Tatum, you set the screen for Smart. Because one thing I give Jason Tatum a lot of credit for is as a superstar player, he will set screens off the ball. He will set screens on the ball. And you don't see that. Like Steph Curry will do it because he's always flying around. But you don't see a lot of superstar level players setting off the ball screens and consistently setting on the ball screens. And I do think at times Joe Mazzulla could help them out more by calling out some of these plays that we've seen they can work. And then that'll open your offense back up again and you can start bombing threes again.
Yeah, they need some more structure for sure. And this is what we talked about last year with Ime too. I think this is probably one of the biggest things he and Joe shared is that they wanted these guys to figure it out on their own, particularly in the regular season. And you feel like the growth offensively would have been a little more linear at this point. These issues that they're having right now in terms of structure, ball control, facilitating, movement, whatever it might be, we've talked about this stuff for years. And for it to go up and down and reach this low point again for them offensively where they're not set up well a lot of the time offensively, or they're taking bad shots, or they're not getting into these layers of playmaking that we just talked about there. You almost wonder if it's indicative of like a flaw in their roster, and it's tough to pinpoint. I think you start at the top with Tatum and Brown, and then you go from there. Like it's easy to say, oh, Smart's playing bad or Rob's hurt or all these little things we look at, but we go back to Brown and Tatum and like the conversation we had last year, the whole split them up thing. These are the things we talked about in those moments when we debated that, is that are these guys capable of consistently running functional offense? Because you have this offense that wants to shoot a ton of threes, that wants to do all these different movement things we talk about, and they just struggle to do it consistently. And I look at their shooting especially, and I'm so baffled by the fact that Tatum's that worst pull-up shooter in the league, as we just talked about, that Brown has really struggled to shoot from three this year. And both those guys, frankly, have struggled to make plays this year, especially when Tatum and when Smart went down originally. And you're saying, get the ball in White's hand more, get the ball in Brogdon's hands more. And you never really know, especially at the end of games, whose job it is to set them up, whose job it is to call the play out. And you almost wonder, like, if they fall short this year, is this roster in need of some level of a shakeup at its core? I know we talked about that last year at its worst, but this year it's kind of championship or bust. And that's why we're pulling out the panic meter, because no one's going to look at a nice competitive second round run and say, all right, they're taking steps, good year, run it back. Even I think an Eastern Conference loss would be really disappointing. I think there's some people that would look at an NBA Finals loss and call it a disappointment, even though last year kind of was a little bit disappointing in itself.
Yeah, just going back to one thing you said about Jalen, I just want to piggyback off it real quick. So I just looked at this. So you mentioned like the volume of threes that Jalen's shooting and how poorly he's shooting from a percentage standpoint. So Kevin Durant is probably like maybe the best mid-range shooter of all time. He takes, and I know he's injured right now, he takes 4.3 threes a game. Jalen takes 7.3. And I know that everybody wants to point to the 3 points and say like how efficient it is to take all these threes. But if Jaylen Brown is legitimately one of the best pull-up 2-point shooters in the NBA, isn't it on somebody on the coaching staff or somebody in the organization to say, hey, Jalen, maybe not 7.3, maybe 5.3, or maybe like Kevin Durant, 4.3 per game. That to me is like understanding the personnel. Jaylen Brown has never been a great 3-point shooter. He's never going to be a great 3-point shooter. Yes, he can get insanely hot, right? Because we've seen Jalen, he's one of the best shot makers right now in the NBA. So there is going to be a quarter where Jalen hits 3 threes in a row and you want him to keep taking threes. But you can feel that process out. I would advocate for him to take more pull-up twos and take 4 twos. Like, I don't know why he has to take so many threes. But in terms of like the shakeup with the roster, I'm sure you'll hear that. And I'm sure you'll hear that, like, unfortunately for Missoula, if he goes out earlier than expected, like if they and I know they own Philly, but if they somehow lost to Philadelphia, who's getting the blame for that? I mean, who would get the blame for that series? You're not going to blame Tatum. Like maybe Tatum gets criticism, but he's your superstar. Jalen is your second best player. And from my perspective, like who on this team would you consider trading? Like, what would be the guy that gets you something? Because you were mentioning earlier, you've given up a lot of picks. Like, Smart's not going to have a lot of value if he continues to play the way that he's playing right now. So I don't think that you do have like a player that you could say, if, and like knock on wood that this doesn't happen, like that the Celtics go on to win the championship. But who's the guy that's getting you something back big time in return? I guess the only guy would be Rob, but you would like to keep Rob around. And the problem with him is, what's his value based on the injury situation around him? Like, I don't really think Smart, like, is Smart a big ticket item right now? Like,
No.
What are you getting from Marcus Smart?
It's so funny because how much it shifted. Last year, Rob was untouchable. This year, I don't think he's got any value at all because of the injury stuff. And I think most people are at this point think he's well on the back nine, and the drop could be precipitous at this point. Not saying it will be, but it's possible. Arthritis sets into that situation, and you're talking about, your Kemba, and then it's over. And it's over before you know it.
Especially with how much he relies on
nobody's giving up anything real for it. He's a gamble. He's a cherry on the top. He's a sweetener to a deal where before he might have been closer to a centerpiece. Marcus has lost his value, I think, as well. Amazingly, Derek White probably has the most trade value on your roster right now. If you were to trade something that you view as a redundancy, because right now he's playing the best.
What's funny, John? One of the trades we kicked around last year, and I know Indiana ended up getting a ton more than this, but a Sabonis for Rob thing. Think of the impact Sabonis would have had on this roster. And there were moves probably across
Sabonis for Rob and picks and other things. And we did talk about that as something. I think you're out. At this point. You're talking about full-on makeover by trading someone like Jalen and completely restarting.
So Jalen's an interesting thing, right?
That's the only thing you could do if you had to remake it. But we're nowhere near, Bobby. We start talking about that,
I know, but we're in this place, and I was looking at it today. I think Nick Wright tweeted I was all NBA team, and Jalen wasn't in it.
So,
well, you're facing this decision this summer where if you can offer Jalen supermax money with an extension, he'll probably take it. If you can't, you're still offering this deal that's well below his market value. So you're now 1 year away from Jalen's free agency, and you don't know if he's staying or not. And that, we've talked about it, John. I think we talked about it with Hayward a couple of years ago, and these decisions a year out, that's when you have to make your decision. Is he staying or is he going? And if he's going, this is probably the time to start thinking about what you might get for him. Because if Brown walks out the door, who knows how much longer Tatum's here for if you can't build a sustainable roster around him.
I don't think we're there yet, Bobby.
So you think you'll be able to retain him?
No, I just don't think that that's a conversation that's necessary at this point, because you'd have to have a calamitous end of the season in order to start questioning whether or not you have the right pieces in place.
I'm just talking about the contract.
Yeah.
Because you're going to go to free agency with him if he doesn't make All-NBA. And he could do it again next year, and they can offer him that the year after if he makes it next year. But
keeping him is easier if he makes All-NBA, but he's pretty fringy. I think you've got 10, 11 guys that are automatic, and he's fighting for a spot for the last 2 or 3 slots with maybe, 10 other viable candidates. It's going to be a close call, but I don't know I don't know that that's something they're thinking about right now.
Well, and I think, Bobby, I saw your tweet about when Nick Wright tweeted that earlier. I think the interesting part about Jalen with that is the position, right? Because I feel like Tatum got screwed with this a couple of years ago. Like, remember when Kyrie made the team, but he had less votes than Tatum because Tatum got votes at like a different position. Like, he was getting votes at guard and forward. And I feel like Jalen may suffer the same consequences. Like, I believe that if you're voting him as a forward, he should make the team, right? But guards, the guard line is just so deep in the NBA right now that he's not going to make it. And I agree with the fact that we're definitely not there yet. They got another postseason run to go. And like, this is the biggest commodity in the NBA, right? You want wings that can play both ways. And I know Jalen's not a perfect defender. I feel like sometimes he falls asleep off the ball. He's not the best off the ball defender. But when he is challenged one-on-one, I feel like he holds up relatively well, even if the numbers don't always favor him when it comes from that perspective. But I do think like the guy that will have the biggest question mark if the season is over is the head coach. But they just took the interim tag off Joe Mazzulla. They showed a lot of faith in Joe Mazzulla. So I don't really see them making a move on from Joe. And like, who's the guy out there, right? Where you're saying like, there's this great coach out there. Like, for example, the NFL this year, it's like, oh, Sean Payton wants to come back in the league. It's like, okay, everybody besides, a handful of teams would want Sean Payton. It's really not like, who's that guy right now that's
and you're talking about a fourth coach in 4 years.
No, wait,
right.
Have we forgotten already? We had this conversation already. We had it at the end of 2 seasons ago when everyone was like, are you crazy? Brad Stevens is a genius. He's one of the best coaches in the world. Who's out there? How could we possibly improve? And then they bring in somebody and we largely credit that person for cracking the whip and getting a system in place and getting these guys to play hard. So I don't think that's an issue. If you have got I always use this analogy, like if you're in a bad marriage, you're not waiting to get divorced when you find the next true love. You're just like, I got to get out of this situation. if Missoula's bad,
well, depends on the prenup.
Yeah, right. But like, you're just like, I got to get out of this, man. This is killing me. So if you think Joe's not the guy, but they just extended him. So I just think you let the players off the hook every year when we slice up the blame pie. If a year doesn't go the way it goes, I feel like fans always apply so much to the coach, and it's the same guy. So you're telling me a core with Tatum, Smart, Rob, Jalen was,
it's the top job out there.
I know, but it was the coach's fault, and then it was 2 years ago, but then last year it was them playing at a high level, but then this year they were bad again, and it's the coach's fault again. I just think you're letting the players off the hook when you're talking about how big a role a coach plays into whether or not you're successful. And I know it matters, but I don't know that's the end all be all. I think it's such a quick.
They might need it though.
We have such a quick trigger to get to Missoula, to get to the coach all the time and point to them as the failures. Like nobody wants to criticize their children can do no wrong, right? Oh, it can't be my kid. It's the teacher. It's the coach. It's the this. It's the that. I think fans are so defensive of the players. We're so quick to blame the coach. I don't know that Joe's the reason they're going to go down this year if they go down.
But let me ask you guys this question as it pertains to Missoula. Think about what we've been talking about for a while here in terms of his issues with the rotation and his reliance on three-point shooting. What if they lose a series because of both of those things, where it's like they took way too many threes, and then secondarily, Marcus Smart closed out 2 of the 3 games, and he had turnovers down the stretch, and he didn't play well. And you had an option to go to Derek White, or you had an option to go to Malcolm Brogdon. Like, I think with the way that he's coached lately, he does set himself up for getting questioned in the postseason.
But doesn't that presuppose there's a better option out there? If Joe Mazzulla insists on shooting threes, and we don't know for sure that the other way is better and that they could necessarily win another way, it might be the right approach. They're just not doing it well, or they're not doing it right, and he may say, okay, play this way, and that could be a million times worse. So you don't know necessarily what the alternative is to that. It's the same thing with the rotations. It makes sense to us to play a certain person, but again, it's analogous to a baseball manager leaving the pitcher in instead of bringing somebody in from the pen. There might not be any other way. Guy gets a hit, the manager was wrong. That guy strikes him out, he was definitely right, but you don't know what would have happened if the other scenario played out. So I think we're assuming that it would have gone differently if something else had happened. And I don't know that that's always the case. The players are the ones out there either making the plays or not.
Yeah, and they were so dysfunctional last year offensively too, remember? And it might have been even worse, frankly, how inconsistent they were. They turned the ball over a ton. They couldn't make plays consistently. And he came in and I think cleaned up a lot of those issues, whether it was the turnovers by shooting quicker in the clock, the layers of ball movement, the off-ball roles for Tatum and Brown rather than, in Ime's case, wanting those guys to be the main playmakers. So I give Joe a lot of credit, too, for tightening up an offense that I think at its core is pretty dysfunctional and really keeping it as tight and efficient as it can be. But, to your point, Brian, if we flip the season and he didn't have this 21-5 start and they started the way they're playing now and maybe had some ups and downs, and you have like the 3/4 of the season that we're talking about now before the hot finish, there would have been a lot more questions about whether he's the right guy or whether he's ready for this, or all the different questions we came into the year with. And I think that hot start, 21-5, just bought him so much rope. I mean, it gets him the extension. It gets him this great record and these great aggregate stats. Frankly, we talked about this last night. Their stats across the board look so much better because they had the best start imaginable for 26 games. And now you're looking at everything since then. If you just boil it down to them, I don't think has been up to par for what they have as a roster. And I don't know if that's their style, their coaching, or if it's these guys just kind of getting tired of those emphases. Because I do sense that Joe's frustrated with them. I do. I know he won't let on publicly.
It's
I know he
3
won't
coaches in a
criticize them
row,
Ime
Bobby.
style.
That's the thing. It's 3. They have played for an entire season under Brad Stevens, and for 2 half seasons,
we've seen the same problems
against 2 separate coaches in a dispirited and inconsistent manner. At some point, like what's the common variable there? It's the players, it's the core. And I know there's different things, injuries, blah, 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 and this and that, but this is a really talented and deep roster, which right now is dealing with a couple of bumps and bruises, but like there's no major excuses beyond. It's just, you've got a stretch here of like pretty meh inconsistent basketball. You had it for the whole first half of last year and almost the entire year before. So again, 3 different coaches. I don't know.
Yeah, I do feel like with Missoula in particular, and you kind of alluded to it, Bobby, it does feel like he's on full tilt right now. Like the comment that he had, I can't remember which game it was after, but he was talking about the layups. Like, hey, he actually said, why don't you guys ask me when we miss layups? You only ask me when we miss threes. And that kind of tells you like he's kind of frustrated right now with the questioning that he's getting at this particular point. So like from an offensive perspective, I agree with most of what you said, Bobby, in terms of he's improved a lot of things. Certainly, even if I have some of my issues with the dependence on the 3-point shooting. The one thing I will say is this. Do you think the defense would look this way if Ime was still the head coach? Like, do you think these blow-bys, especially since the All-Star break, would that be tolerated? Like, I feel like Ime, he put his stamp on the defense. And, hey, if you weren't going to defend, he was going to take you out of the game. And I feel like that same pressure has not been put on the defensive end. To Missoula's credit, he said at his opening press conference, right, I'm going to stress the offense. We need to improve the offense. And they've done a lot of that. Like, another thing that they've done a lot more of this year compared to with Ime. They've been much better in transition. And if you look, they're always looking for the head-to-head pass. Like Smart does it all the time. Derek White does it all the time. Like that's been a major part of why their offense has been significantly better this year compared to last year. But the accountability on the defensive end, I feel like, and look, their numbers overall look good in terms of their defense. But I'm talking about more lately. I feel like the defense just doesn't have that same level of, like that last year, for lack of a better term, they were predatorial. Like they did not want you to score. They were mad when you scored on them, right? Like that was their identity. Back to how we started this about the identity of the team. And I just feel like they don't have that in them right now. In terms
but you don't have Rob or Smart.
They just want to muck everything up. They want to take.
I'm sorry, you don't have Rob or Smart at the height of their powers. That has to be part of what's going on a little bit with the defense, though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's also individual efforts.
Yeah.
And forcing turnovers. I'm sure they're not playing as aggressive. And they, everyone across the board on the roster says we don't have Rob. When we have Rob back there, we can get more aggressive. We can do things we can't do without him.
If Rob was Rob all year, do you think they're having the problems? If Rob was last year's Rob this year and healthy all year, are we worried about the defense nearly as much? If Marcus Smart hadn't sprained his ankle like 11 times this year, like I'm not saying it would have been at the level it was last year, but I certainly don't think we'd be looking at it and be like, these guys have major issues right now on the defensive side. I don't believe so.
No, because Rob played at a defensive player of the year level last year prior to the injury. So no, certainly not. But I do think there is something to some of the slip with this team defensively in terms of Smart. Like he's the point of attack defender. And even like when you watched him the other night, when he got kicked out of the game, Trae Young went by him like on that particular play. Like right, he went by him. Like that should have been an and one for Trae Young. And I feel like I haven't noticed this level of like lack of being able to shut guys down from Smart. He'll still make the smart plays. Like he got the late turnover late in that game against Houston. But I've seen way too many times this year where Smart has got lit. Like, and Mitchell's a great player, but man, Mitchell lit him up. Like if you go back to that number, and the tracking data isn't the be all end all, but Jalen and White were significantly better on him. So I feel like what you had last year is you had an elite on ball defender in Marcus Smart. You had another guy on the wing in Jason Tatum, rather, that was great at that and great helping. And you had a shot blocker and a big that could switch in Al Horford. And I feel like with the exception, and Al's numbers are down as a ISO defender, but he's still been pretty good. You don't have Smart. that you had last year, and you don't have Robert Williams like most of the games you play in. So the defense is not near the level. But I do think there is something to the effort. Like I'll die on this bridge that they are not playing with the same level of intensity on that side of the floor.
Yeah. I think the start on offense, that was probably the worst thing that could have happened to them, because it was like, oh, we could just beat teams doing this. Easy, we'll just gun a bunch of threes and they'll go down and we're awesome. And I think they got used to that. And Bobby, probably more so than any of us on this show, kept pointing out, I don't know, man, the defense, and we're like, who needs defense when you can play at this level?
Well, really shooting through the roof.
And they were just shooting through the roof.
40% for the
but
season.
I think that you didn't have to play that type of defense, because you knew you could just at any point in time, it was a 15-2 run was right around the corner at any time, and it'd be game over in the early part. And I think they've been trying to find that for the longest time and never really committed to the defensive side of things. They've been trying to figure out the offense with this mindset that, like, we were once a great defense. When we want to be again, we'll just turn it on and play defense when the games matter. And they're, I think, a little bored and disinterested by some of it. I mean, last night was a game that they were just flat out not really into playing, totally disinterested from the start.
What's your gut say? How does your gut say this season ends, Brian, for them?
Man, if you asked me this question like a couple of weeks ago, I would have said they're going to win the championship. But I'm really concerned right now. Like, I think if they get the Rob that we saw, even the Rob that we saw this year, I think they're still going to win the championship. I still think they have enough weapons. And Middleton, he's been better as of late, but he's not the same player we saw a year ago. The Celtics, before the injury, of course, for Middleton, but the Celtics, they sort of own Philadelphia. And at this point in time, they do. I mean, they still don't have a guy Philadelphia to cut, even though Tatum was not great in that game. Like McDaniels, we saw him when he was in Charlotte. Jason Tatum was lighting that guy up.
Lit him up.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, that's their guy, right? And we've seen with Doc Rivers, he'll lose faith in that guy. He won't even play him, even though he's supposed to be the guy that covers Jason Tatum. So when this team is right and when this team is healthy, I still believe they're the healthiest team, or the best team and the deepest team in the NBA. I just have to see it get all together again to see if they can get back to the spot that they were prior to the Robert Williams injury and all this weird stuff that's going on post All-Star break. Like, this stuff to me is baffling. Like, I don't know what's going on with them in terms of the Grant stuff as we started this stuff with the Smart stuff. But I do think if you get a healthy Rob back, it completely changes the dimension. And one thing I'll say, and Bobby, you're there at a lot of these games. Would you agree that when Rob's there, it's a different energy with this team? And in particular, I noticed that Tatum, after a bunch of games that he plays with Rob, he always references how much he enjoys playing with Robert Williams. Like, I do feel like this team sort of feels invincible when they have Rob. And I would say this too, like, I wonder, you guys mentioned the start where they were pissed off, right? We heard Tatum in the interview with Drew Hanlon and talking about, I think Chris Mannix had the piece, right? Talking about how mad he was and how much he wanted to work and all this different type of stuff. And they go 21-5 and you say, okay, yeah. At some point during the season, that wears off. Now they're at the point where it's like, okay, the pressure's back on us, right? Like, they really, guys, they let one slip away. Golden State was a better team. I'm not going to deny that. They played better in the finals, but Middleton went down. You played a Miami team that wasn't great in the Eastern Conference Finals that you should have handled in less than 7 games. You really had a golden opportunity, almost like the Bruins in 2019, right? Where all these teams that were supposed to be great, like the Tampa Bay Lightning got upset, the Washington Capitals got upset. Like, you had that road pay for you, and the Celtics didn't finish the job. I have to imagine they're starting to feel some of that pressure, especially it's going to ratchet up when they get into a Milwaukee series, because we've been hearing all year long about, hey, they didn't have Middleton. They didn't have Middleton. I'm sure the Celtics hear this as well. My hope is that they're just going through the dog days, and they'll turn it on when we get closer to the postseason.
Yeah, I think they need all 3 of those guys that we talked about tonight. Smart's got to be Smart. They need Smart. I know everyone thinks he can just push him to the side and let these other guys take over, and that'll solve some things. I think he does have to be at the point of attack, at least as a point guard offensively, for them to be at their best. But it might take a short-term adjustment. Rob, I think all of us came into this year saying that if he's right, they'll win it all. If not, they're probably not at that level. And then I'll even throw Grant in there. Like, I keep saying this again and again through every benching. They need him. Game 7, Milwaukee last year. you don't win that game without him. And I don't know if you give Hauser 17 threes in a game like that, maybe he could knock down 7 or whatever it is too. But I don't know. Grant to me is one of your guys. Like, he is in that circle. I think they need to keep him in free agency, frankly. And I think when he's at his best, when he's at his most confident, he's a really, really good borderline starter for this team. And missing that guy, period, I think shows as much as anything else through these last couple of weeks. I was screaming all last night, get him out there. I know he didn't look great, but he comes in, he blocks that shot weak side. He can't get a shot off, which is still the weirdest thing in the world right now. But
except
I think you got to get him
quarter.
back in there. You got to get him back. Yeah, against the Blazers. He
Fourth
takes
quarter
8.
a couple games ago. His elbow looked pretty good.
I don't blame him. Get the shots up when you can, Grant. You're not getting playing time.
I swear there were money balls in there too. He was just friggin', unreal. All right, Brian, we've kept you long enough, so we'll ask you the final question here, okay? Where here are you, okay? Where on this panic meter are you right now? Okay.
I'm gonna say I'm all the way. I'm in the second green. I'm not panicking. Like,
Okay.
Question last night. I'm probably in the middle.
Yeah.
But I'm in the second green at this
He's
particular
come down
point
there.
in time because I was there. I was in the middle, and I've been talking a lot of Celtics today, and I've convinced myself that I shouldn't panic. Like, teams go through this stuff.
You feel better, Bobby?
Well, I would feel a lot better too if the coach would just play Grant. Like, I still like this, and I know we've harped on this. Just play the guy; he's good. Like, I don't understand it. What's his fixation with Blake Griffin and Luke Cornett? It makes zero sense.
I don't know what the end to that is. Yeah, like, you can't get back in the flow and become himself again without playing. And these other guys, we know they can't fill that role. Even Hauser's been great this year, and I think he's such a nice supplemental piece.
Weirdly stubborn. Grant. There's shades of Belichick in Missoula in terms of how he's dealing with the media and how defensive he gets and how he doesn't like to be questioned. And it really feels like Grant, there's something going on beyond what we know. But you're right. I agree with you both. He absolutely has to play. Well, he has to play Grant.
We know he sleeps more than Bill. He said last week on the Sports Hub that he tapes his mouth shut. So we know he's getting more sleep than Bill. Bill
totally normal.
Sleep, man.
It's a totally normal thing. Yeah,
he does love to talk about his sleep.
There's Joe's an interesting cat.
That's one thing, and being around him, he really does. He really is pretty even keeled and confident in the approach, and he is certain that what he's doing is the right moves. And I know he's trying to learn in places on the fly. I loved him talking to I don't know if you saw that KG and Pierce episode, Brian, where they came through and were talking to him. There's a lot that I like. There's a lot that intrigues me about him. Like, he's just a little bit different. I think he has this plan that's worked in large part this year, and these guys seem to respond and enjoy playing for him too. I mean, he got the seal of approval from the start once Ime got suspended. So I've held out. I've trusted him. I know he's given me a lot of crap and pressers and other guys too, but there's a lot I like about him, and I'm rolling with him.
Yeah. The one thing I'll say is I remember when I was in college, right? This guy, he was playing for West Virginia with one arm. He had like a torn shoulder, and he's playing in the NCAA tournament. He's playing in the end of the regular season with basically one shoulder. I remember
battling John Wall, some of these big-time guys. Yeah,
he beat him. So, I mean, I hope he gets it right in the postseason, but I can't understand some of the decisions and look, I don't want to rehash the Grant thing, but it's just, I mean, it's one of the most bizarre things. Like, I compared it to the Kendrick Bourne thing, right? Remember the Kendrick Bourne situation?
Yeah.
Where Bill just wasn't playing Bourne, and that one, okay, if you told me before the season, hey, Belichick is going to have one of his receivers in the doghouse and he's not going to play a lot, that's believable. This Grant thing to me is just, it's not believable. I still am fascinated by it. I cannot wait. Maybe we'll never get the answer, but what the answer is right now for why he's doing it. I'm fascinated by this.
0 minutes is unfathomable. I understand if you didn't love what he was doing, taking him down from his average of 26, 27 to 20 or 18, or giving some of those minutes to Hauser or doing different things based on matchups. 0 means there's a problem.
8 last night.
The zero and the refusing to put him on the injury report. If he was truly just getting healthier, they would just sit him. But like the 0 and then not acknowledging this injury that he supposedly has feels like he's being punished for something. Again, we don't know, but it's beyond bizarre, Brian.
He came so close too in Cleveland, hitting those 4 threes in the second, 2 chances to win a game at the line. It couldn't have gone any worse in the end.
I know.
That was bad.
I thought he was going to be back. I really did. Like, he was good in that game. I thought he was going to be back. If he just hit one, Williams is probably back, which is the unfortunate part. Can I ask you guys one question? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
So did you guys watch the game last night on NBC Sports Boston?
Yes.
Are we allowed to talk about this? I feel bad. I might have to recuse myself as a former NBC Sports Boston employee.
Okay. All right, it's not going to be too much of a jab, but so it's like Scal and Perk are doing that little like the players only thing, and Scal says they're going to need like some sort of boost. I'm paraphrasing, and Perk goes, "I wouldn't be surprised if he goes to Peyton Pritchard here," and Scal says, "Yeah, Pritchard's hurt," and they literally had just shown him in street clothes. That was hilarious.
Yeah, but you know, you're bringing in a guy like Perk. You just want him to lob some bombs and just be Perk. I don't think there was a ton of game prep going into that. For sure.
I love the very beginning. My favorite part of the night was right at tip off. Scal asks Perk a question right off the tip, and Perk goes, "You're gonna have to wait a minute. I just climbed up all these stairs."
They only talk about 20% of the game. It's a pretty tough watch, but it's in our chat yesterday, I'd say that along with Marcus and Joe were probably the top comments that fans were obsessed with there. We do want to mention a couple of things before we go. Once again, our sponsor here, FanDuel. You want to check that out. Go to fanduel.com/Boston. Take advantage of that awesome offer. Bet 5, get 200 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com/Boston. Also want to let people know, for those who don't already, subscribe to the Off the Pike podcast here with Brian Barrett on the Ringer Podcast Network. It is a Boston sports podcast where he talks to some of your favorite, Boston media figures and types. As I said, Michael Pina and Rob Bradford most recently on the show. Check that episode out. There's a lot of Celtics talk on there, talking a little bit about Jacoby Myers, talking a little bit about the Sox and what's going on. So that's always a fun listen, something I listen to, and I think it's a great way to get caught up on the Boston sports scene. How's that been going for you, Brian?
Oh, it's been a ton of fun, man. I've been really enjoying it. And today was fun with Pina. He's trying to walk me off the ledge. Like, I was very concerned about the Celtics. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, we had James White after every game during the Patriot season. So that was a bunch of fun as well. I mean, we've had some great guests. Charlie Weiss. I mean, my boss, Bill Simmons, he comes on when he's mad. He'll text me.
Yeah. I want a piece. Yeah.
He had a tweet last night.
Michael Pina, by the way, used to contribute to the CLNS Media Network, hosting the Winning Plays podcast with Brian Robb. We'll still pop onto that from time to time, but he's always great as well.
Bill last night, by the way, and this is how I've been kind of feeling inside for a few weeks now. The 2023 Celtics situation's more dire than people seem to realize. I don't know if I go that far, but that's kind of reflective of how I'm feeling a little bit. Like you talk to people nationally, we have guests on the podcast, Brian. Everyone's like, "Oh, come on, they're the 1 seed. They're great. They're amazing. They'll be fine." But we're watching night in and night out, and we're like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Like his dad told me. Like, I had his dad on the pod a while ago. He's been concerned about Joe Mazzulla from day one, so he was ahead of this thing.
I think us Boston people, we just have that in us. We're always waiting for the worst around the corner.
It's what makes us great. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. We overreact to the positive and the negative, and that's always how it's going to go. So, that's that right now. And I agree with you. I wouldn't say I'm green on that panic meter, but I still think the first game that's really going to matter between now and the rest of the season is going to be Game 1 in Milwaukee.
They should have a walkthrough finals. They should have a walkthrough.
And I don't think Philly's beating them either, if that's who they get. So I still think they're going conference finals, and by then you hope they've got everything figured out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It almost might be best for them to have like a Miami round one. And
yeah. Anyway, we are going to wrap it again. So, Brian, thank you very much. It was fun. I hope it didn't keep you too long, but feel free to stop by again if you want to. I don't know if it makes you feel better or worse having this conversation. I know you said you felt better after talking to Pina this afternoon, but, it's almost like a support group sometimes, just kind of get it out there, and, and see, we all, we're here. It's a community. Let out your frustrations and then move on to the next game.
No, I had fun, guys. It was a lot of fun. Love to come back, and it was therapeutic tonight. You know what I mean? Like, it's at the beginning of the season, it's like, what do you say? Like, they're just winning. Like, this is awesome. This is great. Tatum's going to be the MVP. But now it's like you kind of need to have these conversations, right? I mean, you got to go through the therapy session.
Yep. Fair enough. So that's it again. Bobby Manning, again, make sure you check him out, clnsmedia.com. We're back with a Garden Report tomorrow. Celtics on the road tomorrow. So we'll be there after the game to check that out. And as we said, subscribe to the Off the Pike podcast with Brian Barrett over at the Ringer Podcast Network. We will see you guys later.